Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing some medieval machining. I'm going to be cutting out this guide block for the bolt for the lock, and I'm going to be using only chisels. You can get a feel for how much material I'm going to be removing today because the left-hand leg of this guide block is the full thickness of the material, and that was wrapped all the way around. So the right-hand leg is closer to the finished dimension, so you can see how much material needs to be removed. I'm going to be starting from a rough forging, and I'm going to be making that from a length of 3/8 square bar. And of course I need to make 3 of these for each bolt in the lock. This is a fairly simple forging operation. However, there is one point that I want to make clear. If you've watched my video on how steel work hardens even though it's hot, here's an example of how you can make it work for you. Here I've set the location of the first bend, and even though I made this bend while the bar was hot, it will tend to bend here before it bends anywhere else, and you'll see how I use that in just a moment. At this point I'm going to leave this first bend open, and I'm going to move the bar over slightly and start defining the second bend that I need. I need 2 square corners on the inside, so by defining both of these corners I'm going to be able to shape this bar a lot easier. Because both of those corners are already pre-stressed and they're going to want to fall into place as I hammer it around a mandrel. And here you can see how the bar is just naturally taking on a squarish shape even though I'm not hammering the actual corner. Now that I have the rough forgings, I can start the process of fitting this bolt to this guide block. Just to be really clear where I'm heading with this is the basic shape that I'm starting with. And the shaded areas are what I'm going to be removing from the bar. The first thing that I want to do is to square up the inside corners and make it fit the bolt. I'm starting here because if I mess this up and carve away too much material, then I haven't really invested a lot of time in this piece right now, and I could start over and it's not going to be any big deal. So once I start this and get it done and fitted properly, everything else is going to be fairly straightforward, so I can go ahead with the rest of the process. I apologize for the shaky video. I didn't realize that my tripod was leaning up against my workbench, so it's a little bit better in fast forward, so I'm just going to fast forward through all of this stuff. It's pretty repetitive, and basically it's just me taking shavings off of the metal, but you can still see the process and basically how it goes. And here you can see how after only a few minutes the top corner is starting to take shape. It's nice seeing the chips come off the piece, but there's still a long way to go. Now that I have the corners roughed in, I'm going to be taking a really sharp chisel. I've just taken this off the grindstone and I've honed it as well to make sure that it has a really sharp edge. And here I'm basically just planing off the mill scale. Probably only taking off a couple of thou at a time here. It looks like a large shaving, but it's, you know, over a large surface area, so it's accumulating. And this is another area where you need to be extremely careful, because if you take off too much at this point, then it's going to be too loose for the bolt, and you either have to reforge it or try to fix it that way, or start over with a fresh piece. So I'm just taking my time. I remove a little bit, I try the bolt, see how it fits, I take off a little bit more, I work on both sides to get them even, and then I just keep going until it fits. So here I am about half an hour later. The bolt is still a tight fit in the block, but I do plan on doing a little bit of filing later on to fine-tune the fit. I'm just doing the chisel work to show how, you know, machining was done at one time, and basically, you know, this was the technology at the time that these locks were made. So even though this is a long, tedious process, and if you're in a hurry, it's certainly going to be a frustrating process, but I still find it amazing that you can make simple tools and maintain them very easily and create work like this. And I'm sure at the time, you know, this was just as amazing as 3D printing and CNC machines are today. Now that I have the inside shaped so that it fits the bolt, I can start working a lot more aggressively to remove the outside material, because it doesn't really have any tolerances. I just chisel away until I get a shape that I like. The scribe line defines how much material I'm going to be removing off the top of the bolt guide. I've moved the piece down to my leg vise because I'm going to be using a fairly heavy hammer with these chisels, and I just need the support that this vise will give me. The first thing that I'm going to be doing is cutting in a series of grooves with a fairly narrow chisel. I'm using a 1.5 pound ball peen hammer to drive this chisel, and I'm basically starting by defining the line that I've scribed in. So I'm cutting a very shallow notch just to define the line, and then from that notch I'm just going to work across the entire face of the bolt guide. Now that the narrow chisel has sectioned off the top of this bolt guide, I can come in with a wider chisel and plane off all of these sections that are remaining. You can work fairly aggressively with these chisels as long as you leave a place for the metal to go. If you try to take off too much at a time, the cutting edge is just going to get buried into the work and you will damage it. But if it's basically just levering up against the work and creating a chip that can be removed, the cutting edge will last for quite a bit longer. So basically, even though I'm removing a lot of metal, I'm not doing it all at once. I'm just working in little sections and just working very systematically across the entire piece. Here I just finished using a hacksaw to cut the legs to length and to rough in the tenons that are going to be used to secure this bolt guide to the back plate. Now I'm getting ready to start working on the sides. I've used a pencil to sketch in the line that I want to use, and I'm just reinforcing that line with a chisel, just making a dotted line so that I can keep track of it while I'm working. So now I have the piece back in the vise, and I'm going to be using the same process that I used to remove the metal off of the top of the bolt guide. I have a narrow chisel, and that's going to be dividing off the block that I want to remove into sections, and then I'm going to take another chisel and knock out those sections and continue the process as many times as I need to rough out the shape. So here I'm a little further down the process, and you can see how I have the left-hand leg about 85% roughed in. I could continue with the chisels if I wanted to, but at this point most of the metal is removed, and it would take really about 5 minutes with a file to refine that curve and define the shape of this side leg. So that's what I'm going to do. And again, I don't have a problem with this because files were available and were used certainly at this time. However, I do believe that the process probably would have been fairly close to what I showed you today, just because chisels are so easy to make and so easy to maintain, and they do a lot of work, and filing I don't think would be faster than roughing things out with a chisel. So I think in specialized shops there would be a lot of, jigs and swages and things that would get the forging pretty close to the final shape, and then from there they would chisel away any material that needed to be chiseled away, and I think the file would be reserved for probably the last 5 or 10% of the process, just because files get dull, and when they get dull they need to be remade. Chisels, on the other hand, can be resharpened every 5 minutes if you need to, and to maintain that keen edge. So I think that would have been reserved for the heavy work, and the fine work would have been done with a file. Hi, I'm Dennis, and thanks for watching. If you're interested in supporting this channel, the simplest way, of course, is to like, comment, and subscribe. If you have questions and you want to contact me directly, you can do so by emailing me at either one of the addresses that I have listed here. It may take me a couple of days, but I will get back to you. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.